Hello all and welcome to week 3. We're going to start week 3 with looking at black codes and Jim Crow laws. Dividing up week 3 was kind of a challenge for me because these ideas you're going to see are very interconnected. And I had to pick ways and topics to discuss things, but really these 3 lectures could be one long lecture, but I like to try and keep them shorter. I know that's sometimes a little easier. So last week we looked at the amendments that come out of the Civil War, and this week we're going to look at some of the issues that limited civil rights, especially the freedoms of African Americans after the Civil War. And you're going to see a lot of overlap between last week and this week in time periods. With the black codes, we're still looking at the Reconstruction period, and we're actually looking before most states rewrote their constitutions. So that's what we have. So Reconstruction, the goal of the South was to maintain control over African Americans, and they did this through a couple different ways, and we're going to look at both legal means of maintaining white supremacy and extra legal means outside of the law. So the Ku Klux Klan is probably one of the most well-known extra legal means of maintaining white supremacy. This is a domestic terrorist group. It was founded in 1866. It was originally organized as a social club in Pulaski, Tennessee, and the majority of it was Confederate veterans, including Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was the first leader or Grand Wizard of the Klan. And that's important because a lot of times there's myths about the KKK, that they're kind of this extreme fringe group, that they're lower class, that they're basically, for lack of a better term, that they're kind of white trash. And that's really not the case. The KKK goes through several incarnations and changes, but mostly it's going to be upper and middle class white Americans. They terrorized both white and African American Republicans during the period of Reconstruction after their founding. They used mob violence, injuries, murders, and voter intimidation to try and maintain white power during Reconstruction. President Grant was actually very sympathetic to what was going on with the KKK and wanted to protect African Americans. He did the Enforcement Acts, which took place from 1870 to 1871. There were penalties if you interfered with a citizen's right to vote. Congressmen elections were under federal surveillance. They outlawed common practices of the KKK, like forming conspiracy, resisting officers, intimidating officials, and it allowed suspension of habeas corpus to suppress armed combination. So the goal of this was to specifically target the KKK without saying that, and to basically counteract the ways in which they were intimidating both white and African American Republicans. However, unfortunately, if you're aware of American history, I know, as I said, we're not going to be able to discuss the broader history more of the time, but President Grant suffered from a lot of problems. Some believe he was an alcoholic. There was a lot of corruption during his presidency. And unfortunately, the Enforcement Acts, much like a lot of his presidency, were weak and ineffective, and very little was done to actually stop the KKK, especially by the federal government. Okay, so one of my favorite areas of study is film, and looking at how film shows us what people thought of popular thought at the time. So a movie that came out in 1915, which is a little later, but still part of this period we're discussing, is Birth of a Nation. It was made by D.W. Griffith, He was an extremely important filmmaker of the time. He actually invented a lot of the film techniques that are still used today, like fade in and out, and some of the other acting and directing techniques. The film itself was based on the novel The Klansman, and it very much glorified the Ku Klux Klan. It was extremely popular, and it was extremely popular not only with the masses, but even higher up people like Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson reportedly said, "It's like writing history with lightning. My only regret is that it's all so terribly true." And that's really important because he was the president, and he really reinforced this movie. The movie focuses on the Reconstruction period, and basically it shows very negative images of African Americans. It shows slavery like a positive thing. It shows them as happier as slaves than they are being free. It perpetrates some other myths, like the myth of African American males wanting to attack white women. And it features the Klan as kind of this heroic figure that's taking back honor in the South, when the reality was all they were taking back was white supremacy. There was rioting in areas when it was viewed, and some major cities even denied viewing. And some, for example, Cincinnati, it actually came to in a later release. Originally, it was not shown in Ohio. The NAACP boycotted it and raised protests of it in many areas. But there's no denying that people, this really appealed to people, that this really struck a chord with them. And it's, as I said, it's a very negative interpretation of African Americans, and it plays on pretty much every stereotype that has negatively been applied to them. And as I said, glorifies the Klan. Black codes. They gave some rights to African Americans immediately after the Civil War, but they also took rights away. So the negative examples, you had to have a written proof of employment that limited what kind of jobs. And these were state codes, so they vary state to state, and you'll notice in our weekly readings that I actually have some examples of some of the state codes so that you guys can get an idea of them. But it penalized you for leaving a work contract early. Laws against offering higher wages to someone who was already under a contract. It banned African Americans in many places from owning firearms, and it limited freedom to move to a new place often, especially if you were in debt. So that was a huge problem, and we won't discuss sharecropping much because it just is not a part of the subject matter as much we're going to discuss. But sharecropping led to a lot of debt for African Americans. Some of the positive examples is it did grant African Americans the right to marry. However, in most areas, it made interracial marriages illegal. It also gave them the right to own property, make contracts, and testify in court. And what I'm going to say is that once the 14th Amendment passes, we're going to see most of those rights as a given because that's the rights you have as an American citizen. So these started to end when the new constitutional conventions happened. They mostly took place from 1867 to 1868 and were mostly repealed by 1868. So what takes the place of the black codes is Jim Crow laws. They start to take hold in the 1890s, and they're named after what was at the time a rather famous minstrel show Minstrel shows actually start before the Civil War, and basically they're usually white actors in blackface, and they're mocking slaves and African Americans, and they were widely popular, like not only in America but in other countries, and their negativity was pretty far and widespread. So it was named after a song and dance performed by Thomas D. Rice. He was a white actor who performed in blackface, and he did a song called Jim Crow. Then that even before Jim Crow laws actually becomes a pejorative negative slur for African Americans. So it's pretty widespread. And basically, Jim Crow laws, for the most part, focus on enforced segregation in public facilities. Public facilities will include everything from schools, hospitals, libraries, restaurants, hotels, theaters, bathrooms, and drinking fountains. This idea is extremely widely spread. It's not something that only takes place in the South, though it will predominantly affect the South. And then in 1896, I'm going to discuss Plessy versus Ferguson, which makes segregation a federal law, which reinforces that African Americans are not receiving equal protection under the law. So my conclusion is there were early limitations right after the Civil War to help motivate white supremacy, both in the legal and the extra-legal actions. In another lecture this week, I'm also going to discuss lynchings in more depth. Clearly, that's a topic related to the KKK, but as I said at the start, it's very hard to divide these ideas up because they are so interconnected. All of these ideas which take place for the end of the Civil War up until the early, almost mid-20th century. Then once the black codes are repealed mostly by state constitutions, Jim Crow laws come into effect. And between Jim Crow laws and the KKK, we really see a complete and total disenfranchisement of African Americans. They're not allowed equally in public places, and eventually even the right to vote is taken from them. So this week's reference page, here it is. There's quite a bit of history on this. So if you're not familiar with some of the broader themes that I discuss, like President Grant or the KKK's history, or if you would like to write here at Film Site Movie Review, they actually have a review, a rather lengthy 3-page review that discusses Birth of a Nation and the various racial stereotypes that take place in it. So that's a great place to go and learn more about the topic we're discussing, because these can help you in your research paper at the end of our class. So thanks guys for listening to me, and have a great day.